1. Hello?
That's working.
Hey.
Hey.
Yo,
How you
yo.
doing?
Good. 2, 3.
Hi, I'm Richard Davenport,
I'm Richard Lakos.
and we are The Other Richards. We thought we'd take a moment to sit down and kind of have an informal chat with each other about the Lost Fringe project.
So, for some context, the project is out. We've literally finished it this week.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought this would be a good time to sit down and talk through a little of both sides. So, with that,
Let's dive into it.
the Lost Fringe.
Yeah.
So, the Lost Fringe was your idea. Where did it come from?
So the whole coronavirus thing happened, and I think we were all sat around going, what does this mean? Surely like August is further enough away that the Fringe won't be cancelled. And I think everyone was still hoping that it would go ahead, go back to March, and we were still shooting posters for the Fringe. And so I think those were our last couple of shoots in here, actually.
Yeah, that was like, oh my God, yeah. We were doing shoots for
Yeah.
the Fringe right up until the week that it got cancelled.
Yeah, I think we had like 2 or 3 in here, and everyone was like, no, it'd be all right. Like, we'll still be going to the Fringe. Let's not worry. And so I kind of had this idea of, you've got all these characters and these performers who are now stuck at home. And it kind of came from the phrase, all dressed up and nowhere to go. Because I thought, if anything epitomizes it, it's these performers, because you get these wild and wonderful characters that you so associate with the Fringe. And so from there, I kind of thought, well, what would it look like if these performers were stuck at home? They've literally had their home taken away, which is the stage. And I thought it might be humorous to kind of see them at home. It grew very quickly from 6 to... I was talking to about 35 people at one point, and some didn't happen for other reasons. But yeah, we ended up with 27 in the end.
Wow.
Yeah, so we shot 27 performers over 20 days. So tell me a bit about where your idea came from.
There's things that I'm always really interested in are place. I love shooting street corners and bins and all sorts of really mundane, everyday objects and imbuing them with a sense of purpose by, composing them really nicely. So when you initially suggested this idea of the Edinburgh project, I was like, oh, that's a really cool project. But I was immediately attracted to the idea of, if these performers have no space, the spaces also have no performers. And so it felt like a really nice supplementary concept to sort of look at those spaces. That was something that we were kind of talking about when we were kind of reflecting on the impact that not having a Fringe would have. It was this, there was this sort of smaller effect of, well, there are companies and shows who won't get to go out, but then it rippled out into the city not having tourism and crowds and things that, I'm sure financially and economically must be really important. And then that broader scope of the project in that the UK itself, culturally, Edinburgh, the Fringe, seems to fuel so much of what happens culturally for the next year in terms of touring and storytelling. And it just felt like there was this massive loss without all of these.
Totally. I think, one of the saddest things is, I think of Edinburgh, and I've had some of the most powerful hours of theatre that I've ever experienced in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many people who see a show and they go, that's my story. I resonate. Like, that resonates with me. Okay, I'm not the only one that feels this way. And I think that's really sad. Like, every year we talk, there's always a theme to the year. So I wonder what this year would have been.
And the acts themselves, were there any stories about Fringe experiences or the shows that they were taking up that particularly you found interesting?
It varied quite wildly. There were people who were going for their first time, people who'd been as actors but were taking their first solo show, or like doing their newcomer hour, right up to people like Tony Law, who'd been going for 20 years. But I think one of the most interesting stories was William Miller, whose dad, Jonathan Miller, was part of a show called Beyond the Fringe 60 years ago, and this would have been the 60th anniversary of that show. And it made, Dudley Moore and Alan Bennett and Jonathan Miller. But they did a show, 60 years ago, and this was the anniversary. And so he was taking his show, me, my dad, and other grown-ups, all about his experience of growing up on Gloucester Crescent, which is this amazing crescent up in North London where you had all these famous writers lists who lived together, and he said, like, you could hear the tapping of typewriters and you could tell who was writing by the sound that the typewriters made, because they all made different sounds. So I love his shot. He ended up in his back garden and he had a puppet that his dad had from 60 years ago for a Radio Times cover. So we put him up in like the Wendy house, and his father had passed away recently, and so we lit the Wendy house as though he's kind of walking towards the light. So it's kind of, there's a lot within the image that you don't necessarily know from just looking at it. Oh yeah, and I think, one of the images that really sums up the series for me is Ursula in the bath. And again, that's quite humorous. We just thought, where would she be if she couldn't be on stage? Well, obviously she's just lavishly lying around at home, and the purple skin, it all came together really nicely in the bathroom.
But
yeah, and it was just so
confidence.
and it was just so much fun putting these characters in environments that they would never otherwise be.
Yeah.
Like, you'd never go and do a shoot with Ursula in the bath because it just wouldn't sell the show.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really fun overall.
I think that's kind of the nice. It's like a little microcosm of the Fringe itself. There are 3,500 shows that make up the Fringe every year, and so it would be impossible to try and get all of them.
Totally.
But the series is a lovely cross section of the kinds of acts, the kinds of things that you see at the Fringe.
Yeah, it's very much a very small slither of a much larger beast, I guess.
Yeah.
But this was just, I just wanted to try and represent a few of the different styles of shows that you might see there. So tell me a bit about the process of shooting your images.
Oh yeah, well maybe it's worth kind of showing.
Yeah.
Showing the gear. Like magic.
Oh, it's appeared.
They've appeared. I like shooting on film because when I'm shooting these sorts of places in these very mundane ways, there's something very nice about the fact that when you take the photograph, there's a physical a piece of evidence, if you will, of the thing that was there. And so it sort of imprints a sense of importance on what is otherwise a very mundane thing. The process with which I shoot them is, is very constructed and composed, and it kind of gives them a sense of meaning, of purpose, and of importance in that respect.
How did you find going to all these venues, which we're so used to seeing set up as theatre spaces? Were there any that really surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I the first day that I was there, I went and visited Pleasance Courtyard. It's a car park, and there's no sort of fanciness about any aspect of what its life is like outside of the Fringe, and it just has this total contrast to the kind of liveliness that the Fringe brings to it. I mean, I don't know what the actual numbers are of people that would visit it on an average day, but it's got to be in the thousands. If you imagine how many shows that they run out of there. Yeah. There's 17 venues in that small space, in that hub.
Wow.
And it's the hub that everyone kind of travels through on their way to that show. I sort of still think that Underbelly Cowgate is one of those iconic Edinburgh venues because it kind of epitomizes that some space of the city that's, a hole in the wall style space that gets turned into a Fringe venue. And so I think no matter what you go and see there, you always have this image of sitting in some sort of dark, bizarre cavern-like space that I think has seen some of the most incredible shows of the Fringe. For those who don't know, the one that always stands out and we always kind of talk about, Big Belly, was the space that had the original run of Fleabag before it was famous, or kind of where it became so iconic.
I think there's such a haunting beauty to a lot of the images that you took. And I mean, it's amazing because most of them have no people in. Was that a challenge, or?
It's definitely a choice. I choose a lot of the time to wait until I see no people, because I'm very aware of the fact that I'm taking a photo of something and I don't want anyone who looks at it to feel like they're looking at what I kind of refer to as the human zoo. I don't want people to look at it and make judgments about the kind of people that are in those spaces or the kind of people that are present in the image. I very much want people just to look at the space without that context. I think in isolation, if I ever show someone an image of a venue without people in it, the number one thing that they always say is, oh, that's quite sad. And I know I can kind of understand that, but I definitely think that the series in its complete form, when you take the other side of the images and you see these beautiful shots that you've done of people, I think you feel less sad because you realize that, it's the performers and the performances that make those spaces exciting. And I think that to me reinforces that amazing thing that the Fringe does for for the city and for culture in the UK itself. I think the Fringe is one of those amazing, storm in a bottle things that, it happens every year, and it's quite a long thing. It happens for a full month. But I just can't imagine what, the theatrical performance scene would be like without it.
Oh, it's a complete melting pot. Like, I think one of the saddest things is I think about all of the collaborators who won't meet and the chance encounters that you won't have with people because you never know where things are going to start. Like us, for example, had it not been for the Fringe, this company wouldn't exist. Yeah. I mean, it might have, but that was certainly the catalyst for it. And it's just that pot where, I always think of the Fringe a bit like living in a village for a month where you kind of know everyone and you bump into people in the street, and then you get back to London and you go, oh, where is everyone?
Yeah.
And I think, this. I think now you see the two images together, it makes you just go, oh yeah, without one or the other. I mean, they do exist, but not in the same way.
Yeah. I think it's really clear that they need each other, and it's that kind of symbiosis that, is really important.
Yeah.
Well, what do you hope that people kind of take away from the series once they've completed their viewing of it?
I think I want it to serve as a reminder of how important the performing arts are, of how important these stories are for people to tell. Because as I said, I think, sometimes you can be feeling something and you don't feel like anyone else shares that opinion or those feelings, and then you walk into a room and you hear a story or you hear a performance or someone's taken the time and effort to craft a story, and then it can be incredibly personal and it can touch you and it can change the way that you think about things. So I just hope it kind of serves as a reminder that these stories are important, they need to be told. And just because the Fringe isn't happening, it doesn't mean that all of this work hasn't gone into it. And these are real people, without the Fringe, without the performing arts, they don't earn money, they don't have a living, and it really needs to be protected. So I just hope it serves as a bit of a reminder of that. We've still got all of these rich performances, all of these still amazing performers and companies, and I'm sure most of them will be back next year. But I just think it's a nice document of a year that didn't happen. And I think it's kind of been interesting in some ways to see the venues stripped back and the performers stripped out of those venues. So yeah, I hope people enjoy it. Some of those, there's some humour within them, and I hope they just go, oh yeah, this is a fun series as well. So hopefully you enjoyed that. This was kind of the first informal chat we've done in this setup. We think we might do a few more once we're back to shooting and we've got some things to talk about that aren't just how hot it is in the studio.
You can find the full series at our website, www.theotherrichard.com, or if you want to get in contact with us, you can find us at info@theotherrichard.com.
All that's left to say is, I'm Richard Davenport.
I'm Richard Lakos, and we are The Other Richard.
That's so cringe. Yeah.